just tell you, basically, what we are doing in this chapter, Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara, Maya, Prakriti, Shakti. Okay, so the depending on which level you are, you experience the Purusha at the lowest spiritual level, at the higher mind onward, you experience it as an impersonal presence. Okay, there is no person there, but there is a presence of peace, there is a presence of vastness, there is a presence of calm, quiet, liberation. That's a Brahman. But if you go slightly higher up, okay, you experience a Purusha aspect, okay. You become, it's consciousness. And when you go to the highest level, it becomes the Ishvara, and it's the same thing taking so many different forms. At the highest level, Ishvara is one who is, he is a conscious being as well as an impersonal being. Okay. At the lower level, it is impersonal. That is the reason why Buddhism doesn't believe in God as such. And also Jagat Guru, and also that Krishnamurti. Okay, Krishnamurti also says Jiddu Krishnamurti. He says there is no God because they experience only the impersonal aspect of God. But at the highest level, he is personal as well as impersonal. It's interesting because Ramakrishna, his approach was in the personal aspect. He is talking to his mother and getting guidance and everything. He wanted her to guide him, and she was doing it. Okay, but he didn't have the aspect of the impersonal aspect. I think I've told you that story one day when a Totapuri, he was a Hindi-speaking ascetic, and Ramakrishna used to call him Nangto. Nangto means naked. And he came and taught him how to go to the impersonal aspect of the divine. That's a huge story and a very interesting one, but that's another subject altogether. So now this is what we are discussing in this chapter. Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara. And when you experience the Brahman, the world seems to be unreal to you. Okay? That's the experience of Mayavada and the Buddhists. Okay? The world is unreal. When you go into the spiritual place of consciousness, the lowest level, the world seems to be only images without substance. Then when you go to the Purusha aspect, the Purusha, you experience the Purusha as consciousness, but you experience the physical world as unconscious force. Okay, so that becomes Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara. Brahman corresponds to illusion, Maya. And when you are in the Purusha consciousness slightly higher, or even it need not necessarily be higher, but when you experience the Purusha consciousness, you see the physical world as mechanical energy without consciousness. So that's the Prakriti. And when you go to the highest level of the Ishvara, the world becomes neither an illusion nor a mechanical unconscious energy, but the divine Shakti, which is full of power and consciousness. So this is the chapter we are reading. So there are three stages, right? So this is what we are. And Sridhar is explaining how all the contradictory things are actually one. So he has been saying one by one. Now we come to the identical to our notions. This is what we are going to read today. Okay. The one and the many are essentially the same. That's what he's going to tell you in this para. So let's start reading.
Shall I read?
Yeah, do that. The identical to our notions.
The identical to our notions is the immutable. It is ever the same through eternity. For if it is or becomes subject or mutation, or if it admits of differences, it ceases to be identical. But what we see everywhere is an infinitely variable fundamental oneness, which seems the very principle of nature. The basic force is one, but it manifests from itself innumerable forces. The basic substance is one, but it develops many different substances and millions of unlike objects. Mind is one, but differentiates itself into many mental states. Mind formations, thoughts, perceptions differing from each other and entering into harmony or into conflict. Life is one, but the forms of life are unlike and innumerable. Humanity is one in nature, but there are different race types, and every individual man is himself and in some way unlike others. Nature insists on tracing lines of differences on the leaves of one tree. She drives differentiation so far that it has been found that the lines on one man's thumb are different from the lines of every other man's thumb, so that he can be identified by that differentiation alone. Yet, fundamentally, all men are alike and there is no essential difference. Oneness or the sameness is everywhere. Differentiation is everywhere. The indwelling reality has built the universe on the principle of the development of one seed into a million different fashions. But this again is the logic of the infinite because the essence of the reality is immutably the same. It can assume securely these innumerable differences of form and character and movement. Even if they were multiplied a trillion fold, that would not affect the underlying immutability of the eternal identical. Because the self and spirit in things and being is one everywhere, therefore, nature can afford this luxury of infinite differentiation. If there were not this secure basis which brings it about that nothing changes yet all changes, all her workings and creations would in this play collapse into disintegration and chaos. There would be nothing to hold this disparate movements and creations together. The immutability of the identical does not consist in a monotone of changeless sameness incapable of variation consist in an unchangeableness of being which is capable of endless formation of beings, but which no differentiation can destroy or impair or minimize. The self becomes insect or bird and beast and man, but it is always the same self through these mutations because it is the one who manifests himself infinitely in endless diversity. Our surface reason is prone to conclude that the diversity may be unreal and appearance okay. But if we look a little deeper, we shall see that a real diversity brings out the real unity. Show it as it were in its utmost capacity, reveals all that it can be, and in its is in itself, delivers from its whiteness of hue the many tones of color that are fused together there. Oneness finds itself infinitely in what seems to us to be a falling away from its oneness, but is reality, but is really an inexhaustible, diverse display of unity. This is the miracle, the Maya of the universe, yet perfectly logical, natural, and a matter of course to the self-vision and self-experience of the
Very big para, but essentially the idea is very simple. The one becoming the many. And when the many become, it's an infinite variation. Okay, it reminds me of Archanadi's question about the two Swabhava and Swabhava. She asked whether uh, two souls having the same Swabhava, okay, can have the same function or something like that she asked. But when the one is becoming the many, usually there is a huge amount of difference between the so when the divine is creating also the Swabhavas, there is no reason for him to create only one type of swabhava. He creates 100,000 million types of swabhavas. So the one becoming the many, that's the burden of this para. Okay, that's the gist of this para. We can give very interesting examples also. In the physical world also you have this. Okay, take the human body. It starts with just one cell. Okay, and that one cell starts dividing itself when it is fertilized. It becomes two, then it becomes four. It goes geometrical progression, not arithmetic. It is not one becomes two, two becomes three, three becomes four. No, it goes on increasing. That's also an interesting principle in nature. Geometrical progression. The farther it goes, the quicker and the more multiform it becomes. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, 16 becomes 32, 32 becomes 64, 128. It goes on like that. So just imagine we begin our life with one single cell, and that cell when fertilized starts becoming like this. At what point does the different tissues start coming up? It's a very interesting thing if you think about it. And from where does this bone tissue, flesh tissue, okay, muscle tissue, cartilage tissue, okay, um, very interesting. Even the light sensitive tissue in the eye, the teeth, okay, the hard teeth is absolutely the opposite. So all these things, one becoming the many. This is one interesting example. But even in the physical world, we see that. For instance, the caterpillar becomes a cocoon, and the cocoon becomes a unbelievable butterfly, beautiful butterfly. The same thing taking different forms. But here it is not the example I'm giving you is not that one becomes the many, but it goes on changing the form. Okay, so that also is related to what we are reading here. The one becoming the many. Okay, that's exactly what he's saying, and he's saying that the many cannot exist without the one because that is a supporting. It's like a parent who produces 10 children. Not in modern times, but he producing 5 children. All of them have something in common. Okay, but they're all different. Even twins are different. Okay, so this is what he's saying in the para. Now there are one or two things which are very interesting. So we'll see that. I'll quickly read each sentence and we'll see if it is clear. When Srimdev is talking of the identical, he is meaning the one. Okay, so normally we do identical means we feel sameness, but Srimdev is using the word identical in the sense of one. Okay, the identical to our notions is the immutable. We think of it as something static and stable. Okay, it is ever. This is to our notions. Okay, it's not really so. It is ever the same through eternity. For if it is or becomes subject to mutation, or if it admits of differences, it ceases to be identical. Okay, very clear. But what we see everywhere is an infinitely variable fundamental oneness, which seems the very principle of nature. If you look very carefully, you will see in the physical world that oneness is there always as well as multiplicity. Both are there. Take any species. There is a very clearly all cats are different. And yet there is something called catness. You can't make a mistake between a cat and a dog. You can distinguish them. So there is a sameness and there is a multiplicity. So this is in the physical world also you see the same thing. It is not only trees. There are mango trees, there are chico trees, there are also tamarind trees. But even the species of the mango trees, each tree will be different. And even it goes even more. If you there are langadas and there are begampallis, okay, there are Himayas, all these are mango varieties. But even two trees giving the same langada, even they will differ. So sameness and difference is something very interesting in the world. They always go together. This is the principle that applies everywhere, even Purusha Prakriti. They are always together, although they seem to be opposites. Okay, that's what Srimdev is saying. We go to the next sentence, which seems to be the very principle of nature. In nature, you can see that. Okay, all human beings are essentially the same, and yet they are all different. The basic force is one, but it manifests from itself innumerable forces. The basic substance is one. Now, one by one, he is going to tell you about substance, vital, and mind. By the way, in our Indian philosophy, they give this example of the oneness and the variety in this way. They say gold. Take gold ornaments, okay? Take 10 gold ornaments, rings, earrings, nose rings, bracelets, anklets, all are made of gold. Put them on the table, they are all different. And yet there is Gold is common to all of them. Okay, so this is what you see. Now, normally we don't see that. The example given about gold is very easy. You just melt all the ornament and you will get gold, which is one. But at our level, we don't see that oneness. But if we are raised in consciousness, we can start seeing the oneness. That is the. That's why that oneness is so important. Now we were seeing in synthesis of yoga, oneness and equality. If you go there, then you are in knowledge. Okay? But if you don't go there, you are in ignorance, because you are seeing the multiplicity and you think that that is the reality. It is not the reality. The real reality is the oneness. And the relative reality, the world is not unreal, but it is relatively real. Why relatively? Because it is temporary. It is in time and space. And in time and space, nothing is permanent. That is why it is temporal reality. Okay? So, the basic force is one. In other words, at a universal level and also at an individual level, the force is in universe. There are so many different types of forces. There is the force of gravitation, there is the storm, and even storms go on varying. There are tornadoes, there are cyclones, okay? Then there are monsoon, rain, all these are also forms, but all different. But a force is one. So then you come to substance. Take matter, okay? But matter also has got so many different types of elements. When I was at school, they used to tell me that there are 90 elements, 90, 91, 92. Now they have found, now the list has gone up to 190. Uranium, plutonium, okay? All sorts of things, platinum, gold, silver, all sorts of things. They are essentially of one nature, all these elements, but they are many, and I don't think it stops at 190, but it will probably go to much more. Okay, so, but then he's saying mind also is one. The mental vibrations become different in different individuals. And not only that, even in one mind, there are mental states, mind formations, thoughts, perceptions differing from each other and entering into harmony or into conflict. Life is one in us. Life is one, the vital. But the forms of life are unlike and innumerable. Humanity is one in nature, but there are different race types. And this is very easy. And every individual man is himself in some way unlike others. Nature insists on tracing lines of difference on the leaves of one tree. She drives differentiation so far that it has been found that the lines on one man's thumb are different from the lines of every other man's thumb, so that he can be identified by that differentiation alone. By the way, it's not a very good way nowadays. They go even they scan the eye of the person. Okay, I remember in nowadays in when you workers in a factory, for instance, they have to go and there's a scanner. When you have to announce your presence, you will have to stand in front of the camera and the camera will scan your eye. And for each one, the scan will be different. And that identifies that you are present. And then the gate opens and the worker can go in. Nowadays, there is no register for absence presence. This is a modern method in industry. So, and that is much more because it is digital, it is electronic, it's not physical like in the thumb. Okay, so it's much subtler, but the principle of the one becoming the many applies even in the subtle. Okay, so then Srimati is saying oneness or sameness is everywhere, differentiation is everywhere. The indwelling reality has built the universe on the principle of the development of one seed into a million different fashions. But this again is the logic of the infinite. When you think about it, it's really very difficult to understand how the one can become the many. Okay, what is the process by which it becomes? Very difficult. We don't know. We can't understand. How that one cell can give you bone tissue and muscle tissue and light sensitive tissue and teeth, hard teeth. How does it become? So, because the essence of the reality is immutably the same. It can assume securely these innumerable differences of form and character and movement, for even if they were multiplied a trillion-fold, that would not affect the underlying immutability of the eternal identical. The one can make itself into 100,000 million infinite forms. But the one will never change, it remains stable. That is the basis of all multiplicity. Because the self and spirit in things and beings is one everywhere, therefore nature can afford this luxury of infinite differentiation. There is a very interesting discussion between mother and Tolstoy's son. I'll mention that as soon as we come to that particular place. If there were not this secure basis, the one is a secure basis, and from that secure basis, the temporal things are coming out, okay? The temporal facts, which brings it about that nothing changes, yet all changes. That's interesting. It's a law, he's saying, which brings it about that nothing changes, yet all changes. All her workings and creations would in this play collapse into disintegration and chaos. There would be nothing to hold her disparate movements and creations together. Okay. Now, this particular sentence, I'll give you the instance of what mother had a talk with Tolstoy's son. The immutability of the identical does not consist in a monotone of changeless sameness, incapable of variation. We have described this. When everybody realizes the divine, it's not that they realize the divine only in one way. Each one realizes in his own way, which is quite different from the others. Okay. Note, interestingly, we keep harping on that. Mother and Srivendra were both divine, and yet Mother was into painting and music, and Srivendra was into literature. Different, okay? So, the immutable, there's a hacha now. So, monotone of changeless sameness. Okay? This is what many students also ask when we are reading the synthesis. They say, oh, synthesis means what? Sameness, oneness, and samatha. You are not affected by anything. Then won't life be very dull? Without any interest? There is no emotion, there is no attraction, no repulsion. Okay. But that's the first stage. After that, they remain the same, and yet all the emotions also can come in. Okay. You can get happiness, you can see all different shades of happiness, everything. So now, this was very interesting. Simply saying, it is not a monotone of changeless sameness, incapable of variation. It consists in an unchangeableness of being, which is capable of endless formation of being. Mother in Japan met Tolstoy's son. I think some of you know about the story. When she met him, they were talking about harmony and all that. And Tolstoy's son told her, it's very easy to have harmony. There should not be any war between nations, between people. There should be no quarrels. It's very easy. Mother said, how? How do you propose to do that? He said, very simple. Everybody should eat the same food. Everybody should wear the same clothes. Everybody should speak the same language. Okay. In fact, at one time, there was an effort like that in the world. They created a language which everybody should speak. I think it was called Esperanto. Okay. So it doesn't work. Okay. So the divine is not going to have sameness. So mother laughed. She said, he doesn't understand the principle of variety and wealth. The divine is not interested in oneness alone. He is interested in wealth, splendor, okay, richness. There has to be a lot of difference also. Why should the divine only enjoy oneness? He can also enjoy the many. Okay? So that's what this is. So I'm reading the sentence again. That's what it refers to. The immutability of the identical does not consist in a monotone of changeless sameness incapable of variation. It consists in an unchangeableness of being which is capable of endless formation of being. So this is the fact. Both depend on each other. The many does not depend, the many depends on the one, but the one does not depend on the many. But it has got the capacity to produce the many. Now, he is again going. The self becomes insect and bird and beast and man, but it's always the same self through these mutations, because it's the one who manifests himself infinitely in endless diversity. This reference is to the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, when he says Brahman becomes the blue-eyed bird, the red-eyed bird, it becomes the animal, it becomes man, the old man and the young child. This is what the Brahman becomes, all everything. Our surface reason is prone to conclude that the diversity may be unreal. Okay, now that's the whole point, because surface reason. Why unreal? Because everything in the physical world is temporal. It comes into existence and disappears from existence. But it is not, it is a relative unreality. Those who see it from the higher mind onwards, they see the physical world as illusion and unreal. It is not unreal. It is real, but it is temporal reality. Okay. It depends on how you define reality. If you say reality is something that should remain the same forever, then you are referring to the one. But when you say that reality can come temporarily into existence in time and space, then you are talking about the physical world. Okay? So, our surface reason is prone to conclude that the diversity may be unreal. And in fact, this happens because the Mayavadins and the Buddhists are all saying the world is unreal because they're seeing it from one level. An appearance only, but if we look a little deeper, we shall see that the real diversity brings out the real unity. You can see that unity everywhere in the physical world. Okay? Shows it, as it were, in its utmost capacity, reveals all that it can be and is in itself, delivers from its whiteness of hue the many tones of color that are fused together there. Okay? This is a very interesting image. The prism, the oneness when subjected to the prism, and that prism is Maya. Maya is the power of the divine to create the many. So the prism breaks up the white light into all the different colors. Not only 7 colors, it can break up into 10,000 million colors. Okay, so that's very. Then oneness finds itself infinitely in what seems to be a falling away from its oneness, but is really an inexhaustible, diverse display of unity. This is the miracle, the Maya of the universe. Yet perfectly logical, natural, and a matter of course to the self vision and self experience of the infinite. If you don't limit yourself only to the lowest level of the spiritual planes of consciousness, but go even higher up, you will see this truth of what he's saying. The one becoming the many, and both are real in a relative sense. Okay. So now we come to the next paragraph. It's a very small paragraph. Uh, now, sometimes I'm not specifying who should read and who should not read. So some people get left out very often. Okay. So, for instance, I would like today, if she is there on the line, okay, Jyoti Anand. Okay, I think she has read only once. So, Jyoti, can you unmute yourself and read the next para? Do that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, please do that. For the Maya of Brahman.
For the Maya of Brahman, I can know myself.
Pardon?
The voice is echoing. For the Maya of Brahman is at once the magic and the logic of an infinitely variable one. If indeed they were only a rigid monotone of limited oneness and sameness, there would be no place for reason and logic. For logic consists in the right perceptions of relations. The highest work of reason is to find the one substance, the one law, the cementing latent reality, connecting and unifying the many, the different, the discordant and disparate. All universal existence moves between these two terms, a diversification of the one, a unification of the many and diverse, and that must be because the one and the many are fundamental aspects of the infinite. For what the divine self-knowledge and all knowledge brings out in its manifestation must be a truth of its being, and the play of that truth is its Leela.
Very interesting para, and he's giving what is a Leela and what is Brahman, magic and logic. It's interesting, okay, because in magic there does not seem to be any logic. Logic is something very rigid, and from one level you can go to another level. You see the process, okay. This becomes this, this becomes this, this becomes this. This is a logic. But Maya, magic, you don't find any link between what is happening. Okay, how does the one become the many? How does the caterpillar become the cocoon? And how does it, from that cocoon, how does a beautiful winged moth come out? So it's impossible to explain. So that's the magic. And yet the magic is the logic of the infinite. That's what Sri is saying. The Maya of Brahman, the word Maya we have discussed many times. Maya is the power of the divine to create forms. Okay? But when you see it from a lower level, the forms seem to be unreal, and therefore Maya takes on the meaning of illusion. So even Maya has got three meanings. At the highest level, the meaning of Maya is the power of the divine to make forms, real forms. Okay? Then you come down to the other level, the spiritual planes, and Maya is the power to make illusions, because the forms that you see in the physical world are illusions. So Maya takes on the meaning of illusion. And at the lowest level, okay, in our Indian language is very common. Oh, all this is the Maya. It is the physical world itself is Maya. Okay, so there are three different meanings for the same word. Just like also we have many. Even in English, we have one word sometimes with 3-4 meanings. Okay, that's very obvious. But in Sanskrit, it's much more common. Okay, that's the whole problem. Take the word gati. Okay, gati can mean speed, but it can also mean the way you are walking. Okay, gati, the style of walking, that also is gati, and gati also means the destination to where you are going to go. so this is the magic and logic. Okay, so magic also. So Maya takes on these three meanings. At the highest level, Maya is the power to make forms, real forms. At the lower level, Maya is the power to make illusions. That's Brahman consciousness. And in the physical world, actually, Maya is the one that the physical world is Maya. You don't know. Everything is a miracle. So this is what he's saying. The one becomes the diverse meaning. But they are very linked together. Okay. We have now about 15 minutes left. So we can read one more para. Now he is going to talk about consciousness and Maya. What is true of Brahman is also true of Shakti. Okay, he is going to compare Brahman and Shakti. It's about a page. Let's read it.
Can I read it, Rangada?
Yes, do that. This then.
This then is the logic of the way of universal being of Brahman and the basic working of the reason, the infinite intelligence of Maya. As with the being of Brahman, so with its consciousness Maya, it is not bound to a finite restriction of itself or to one state or law of its action. It can be many things simultaneously, have many coordinated movements, which to the finite reason may seem contradictory. It is one but innumerably manifold, infinitely plastic, inexhaustibly adaptable. Maya is the supreme and universal consciousness and force of the eternal and infinite, and, being by its very nature unbound and illimitable, it can put forth many states of consciousness at a time, many dispositions of its force, without ceasing to be the same consciousness force forever. It is at once transcendental, universal, and individual. It is the supreme supracosmic being that is aware of itself as all being, as the cosmic self, as the consciousness force of cosmic nature, and at the same time experiences itself as the individual being and consciousness in all existences. The individual consciousness can see itself as limited and separate, but can also put off its limitations and know itself as universal and again as transcendent of the universe. This is because there is in all these states or positions or underlying them the same triune consciousness in a triple status. There is then no difficulty in the one thus seeing or experiencing itself triply, whether from above in the transcendent existence, or from between in the cosmic self, or from below in the individual conscious being. All that is necessary for this to be accepted as natural and logical is to admit that there can be different real statuses of consciousness of the one being, and that cannot be impossible for an existence which is free and infinite and cannot be tied to a single condition. A free power of self-variation must be natural to a consciousness that is infinite. If the possibility of a manifold status of consciousness is admitted, no limit can be put to the ways of its variation of status, provided the one is aware of itself simultaneously in all of them, for the one and infinite must be thus universally conscious. The only difficulty which a further consideration may solve is to understand the connections between a status of limited or constructed consciousness like ours, a status of ignorance, and the infinite self-knowledge and all knowledge.
So, the big para, and he is explaining now how the one can become the many, and it is he is talking here of the consciousness. And what is applicable to consciousness can also be applicable to Sat, it can also be applicable to Chit, it can be applicable to Shakti as well as to Ananda. Okay, the gradation of the highest to the lowest, it's all connected, but they seem to be the opposites. But there is only a seeming, there is no really opposites. Okay, so that's what he is explaining. He is saying it can be here he is dividing into three levels only. He is dividing into the transcendent, which is outside the universe. Then he is dividing into the cosmic, which is the in-between, and below. We speak of the three levels, and this is what he is saying very clearly here. The transcendent is above. Then the cosmic self is in between, and the lowest is the individual. When you are in the individual, you see the many and you are in ignorance. But when you go to the middle level of the cosmos, your ignorance starts to reduce, and yet there is ignorance, because you start seeing the oneness, but you are also seeing the many. Then you go to the transcendent level, you see only the many. You see only the one. Okay. You see only the one, you don't see the many. Okay. We gave an example the other day of that the astronaut who is sitting at home and he's seeing the many. He's seeing his children, he's seeing his house, he's seeing everything, his wife, he's having breakfast of different things, all the many. But the moment he sits in the rocket and starts going up, the many start disappearing and the oneness comes up. At the highest level in the space station, he's seeing the whole earth, but he's not seeing the details in the earth anymore. Okay. So what does Shiva want? He wants you to experience the transcendent, he wants you to experience the cosmic, and he also wants you to experience the individual divine. Integral yoga, okay? The integral philosophy. So this is what he is describing in this paragraph. Now he says that at our level, it is impossible to imagine how one can become three things. So he says there are three things which you have to admit. If you admit that, then this fact becomes possible to explain. Okay. Three premises have to be admitted. That's what he is saying. Okay. There is the first possibility, second possibility, third possibility. I'll quickly just tell you that, and we have got 10 minutes. We can probably read the next one. Oh, the next one is a very big para. So, okay, we'll go through this para. Okay, but basically what he's going to tell you is this: the powers of Satchidananda, okay, the infinite, immutable consciousness has got three powers. The first power is it can take several poises of consciousness. It can station itself at the highest level, it can station itself at the middle level, it can station itself at the lowest level. This is the, what can do that? Satchidananda. And therefore, it is consciousness that can do that. It can be Ananda that can do that. Even the substance can do that. And power also can do that. So, 3 levels he is talking about. But in between the 3 levels also, all the different grades, that also it can do. Normally, even in spiritual experience, when you experience one aspect only, normally it's only one aspect. Okay? The Ramakrishna has an interesting word for that. He says it's a Jiva Koti. A Jiva Koti is a spiritual being who places himself in the spiritual planes of consciousness, but only one level. And a Ishvara Koti, he says, is one that can range about and have the simultaneous consciousness of several levels. Okay? So Srimda wants you not several levels, he wants you to all the levels he wants you to have. That would be the realization of the supreme divine and the integral divine. Okay? So we have about 6 minutes. So we'll try and go through this. Basically what you say. We'll just quickly go through. This then, I'm reading the paragraph.
Ankita, can you just summarize the 3 possibilities today in 6 minutes?
Yeah, I did that. Okay, I'll do that. So first possibility is it can take several poisons of consciousness at the same time. Okay. Highest, middle, and lower. This is the first thing that you have to admit. You have to say that yes, it is possible to do that. Second, the power of free variation without in any way affecting its immutability. This is the second thing that you have to admit. The second premise. The second premise is it can vary itself. It need not remain the same. When he's talking of the first power, Gitanjali can be at the highest level. She can also, without changing herself, be at the second level. And without changing herself, she can be at the third level. This is one power. But the second power is Gitanjali changes herself to the second level and changes herself to the third level. That's the power that he's talking about in second. Free power of self-variation without in any way affecting its immutability. Then the third power that he's talking about is the power to limit itself. Okay. So first is the sameness manifesting itself everywhere. Second, the power to change your status. You become different. Okay. And the third one is it can limit itself. Okay. The consciousness, when it comes, they are all different laws. So these are the 3 laws. If you admit, then the whole world can be explained very easily. So the third power is it can limit itself. Sat has the power of being subtle, but it can make itself gross. It has that power. Second, Chit can become unconscious if it wants. It has the power, it's free to make itself unconscious in grades. The third, power. Highest omnipotence can also make itself, limit itself and make itself the most powerless thing, the inconscient. Okay? And finally, Ananda. Infinite Ananda can also limit itself and make itself less until finally it becomes in the physical world, it becomes pain, pleasure, indifference. So these 3 things you have to grant the powers to the Satchidananda. And if you do that, then it becomes possible to understand. So these are the premises that Swami is saying you have to admit. Okay? So first, the power to place itself on different levels without change. Second, the power to place itself at different levels with change. Okay? And the third one, to limit itself. It limits itself. Limiting itself and changing the form need not be the same, because you can change the form without limitation, but you can also limit yourself. So this then explains the process of involution. The highest, which is infinite, makes itself finite in grades, and finally it becomes the most finite. The consciousness, which is the supreme consciousness, has got the power to limit itself and slowly in various grades become unconsciousness at the inconscient level. Shakti also can limit itself and become the opposite of itself. And last, the Ananda also can limit itself and become that. There is also an interesting thing which I might just mention casually. Why does it have to limit itself if it is manifesting? Because the manifestation is infinite. We agree. The world is infinite. But there are levels of infinity. Can we say that the infinity of the universe is the same as the infinity of the Satchidananda? No, we can't say that because the infinity of Satchidananda is greater than the infinity of the physical world. Even mathematics admits that. There are levels of infinity. Okay, it's an interesting thing. And if you remind me, I'll give you an instance of how there are grades of infinity. There are levels of infinity. Level 1 of infinity, level 2, level 3, level 4, and the levels also are infinite. It's a very interesting thing. So, this if you grant, then when the infinite, the greatest infinite has to produce the lowest infinite, it has to limit itself. It's very easy to understand with one example. Okay, I want to knock a nail into the wall. Okay. What is the amount of power I need to knock that nail into the wall? It has to be appropriate to the work to be done. It has to be proportional. If I use too much force, I'll break the wall and my work will not be done. And if I use too little force, I will be unable to put that nail into the wall. Therefore, there is a limitation, and the limitation also has to be proportionate to the work to be done. And the work to be done in the universe is limited. Therefore, the consciousness has to limit itself, the Ananda has to limit itself, and the force also has to limit itself. Otherwise, it will be a manifestation without reason and with chaos. So that's why the limitation is important. Okay? So we stop here today, and next time we can continue with the next one. The second, the three possibilities. He'll tell you one by one in 3 paragraphs. Okay? We stop here today.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Have a nice day.
Yes. Au revoir, everybody. Have a nice day. Okay.
Au revoir,